My sister's engagement party was supposed to be a celebration. 43 people, a rented venue in the suburbs, my mom's famous lemon cake on the dessert table, and somewhere between the champagne toast and my aunt pulling me aside near the coat rack, my entire family found out I'd been quietly building something they never knew existed. And the version of me they'd invented in their heads shattered in real time. Before I take you back to how this all started, I want to ask you something. Have you ever worked twice as hard as someone else and still been made to feel like the lesser version? Like no matter what you accomplished, you were always one step behind someone who wasn't even trying. And as you're listening, where are you watching from? What time is it for you right now? Because it's past midnight for me and I'm still processing what happened 3 weeks ago. My name is Nadia. I'm 31 years old. I have a one-bedroom apartment I own outright in Columbus, Ohio, a small commercial cleaning business I built from nothing, and a savings account that would make my parents' eyes water if they knew the number. They don't know the number, they never asked. What they do know, what they've always known, is my sister Petra. Petra is 3 years younger than me, effortlessly charming, and has been the gravitational center of our family since approximately the day she learned to smile. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I say it the way you describe the weather. It's just a fact of the landscape I grew up in. Growing up, my parents were not cruel. I want to be clear about that. They didn't scream at me or tell me I was worthless. It was quieter than that. It was the kind of favoritism that hides behind logic. Petra needed more, they'd say. She struggled more. She was more sensitive. I was the easy one. The responsible one. The one who didn't need as much because I always figured it out. What that actually meant in practice, Petra got a car at 16. I got bus money and a used bike. Petra went to theater camp every summer from ages 11 to 17. I got 1 week at a community rec program when I was 12 and then nothing after that because, as my mom explained, you don't really have a passion the way Petra does. I was 10 when I stopped asking for things that cost money. I learned that the answer would always come wrapped in some version of "you'll be fine." The thing about being told you'll be fine your whole childhood is that you either collapse under the weight of it or you get very, very good at making sure you actually are. I chose the second one, not because I was noble, because I was angry and I had nowhere to put it. When I was 17, my dad sat me down and told me they had a college fund for me. 4 years at a state school, covered. He was proud when he said it, like he was handing me something enormous. I remember nodding and saying thank you and feeling, for a brief moment, like maybe it was gonna balance out. Like maybe all those years of bus money and watching Petra get the car and the camps and the new clothes, maybe this was the thing that made it even. I filed my FAFSA. I got into Ohio State. I deferred for a year to save extra money because I wanted to graduate without loans. And during that gap year, working 2 jobs and living at home, I watched my parents put a $12,000 deposit down on a condo for Petra so she could have stability while she figured out her life. I watched them pay 3 months of her car insurance when she got a speeding ticket and couldn't afford the surcharge. I watched them take a family vacation to Myrtle Beach, just the 3 of them, over Thanksgiving, while I picked up extra shifts at the restaurant where I waitressed. I told myself it was fine. I was almost at school. Everything would reset. It didn't reset. About 6 weeks before I was supposed to start my freshman year, I went to confirm the tuition payment with my mom. She got very still. My dad came in from the other room like he'd been waiting, and they told me, together, which I've always thought was a cowardly way to do it, like a united front makes a betrayal softer, that the fund was gone. Not all of it. They kept saying, not all of it, like that mattered. About 60% of it had been used over the past 2 years. The condo deposit, Petra's car repairs, a dental procedure Petra needed that wasn't covered by insurance, and then, the last chunk, almost $9,000, had been loaned to my dad's brother, my Uncle Garrett, who was going through something and would pay it back. He never paid it back. Of course he didn't. My parents said they were sorry. They said they would help where they could. They said maybe I should look into a payment plan with the university or consider starting at Columbus State Community College to save money. my mother actually said. And I have replayed this sentence in my head more times than I can count. You've always been so resourceful, sweetheart. We knew you'd land on your feet. I didn't cry in front of them. I went to my room, sat on the edge of my bed, and stared at the wall for about an hour. Then I opened my laptop and started looking at community college schedules. I want to tell you something about community college that no one says out loud enough. It is not a consolation prize if you treat it like a launchpad. I took every business course they offered. I took an accounting class twice because I wanted to understand it at a cellular level. I worked 40 hours a week. I ate a lot of rice and canned soup, and I didn't complain about it to anyone because complaining felt like weakness, and weakness felt like giving my parents the satisfaction of being right, that I'd be fine, that I'd figure it out, that I didn't need what was taken from me. I transferred to Ohio State after 2 years, paid for myself with a combination of grants, a small scholarship, and the money I'd saved. I graduated in 3.5 years with a degree in business management and approximately $11,000 in the bank, which I had guarded like it was oxygen. During all of this, my family asked how I was doing the way people ask how the weather is, not really expecting information, just making conversational noise. My mom would occasionally say something like, "You still doing that business stuff?" And I would say yes, and she would nod, and the subject would move inevitably back to Petra. Petra's acting classes, Petra's new boyfriend, Petra's ambitions, which changed seasonally but were always described as deeply promising. My aunt, my mom's older sister, was the only one who ever asked a real question. She'd corner me at holidays, not in a pushy way, but in the way of someone who actually sees you. She'd say, "How's the business coming? Tell me something specific." And I would tell her, and she would listen. Actually listen, not just wait to respond. When I was 26, I started my cleaning company. I know that sounds unglamorous. That is the point. Glamour is expensive. Cleaning contracts are steady. I started with 3 clients, 2 offices, and a dental practice, and a secondhand commercial vacuum I bought for $340 on Facebook Marketplace. I worked every job myself for the first 8 months. I watched every free YouTube video I could find about business operations, scaling, employee management, and contracts. I watched so many videos about property maintenance and commercial cleaning industry standards that the algorithm genuinely seemed convinced I was a middle-aged facilities manager named Dave who was also, inexplicably, very interested in refinancing options for small business owners. By the time I was 29, I had 12 employees, 41 regular clients, and a net monthly revenue that I will not specify because it's not the point. The point is that I had built something real and solid and entirely mine, and my family had no idea, because my family had stopped asking questions that required real answers sometime around 2016. My sister got engaged last spring. His name is Dominic. He's a personal trainer, seems decent enough, talks about macros more than I personally find interesting, but he makes her laugh and he shows up, which is more than I can say for some of her previous choices. When she called to tell me, she was so happy that I felt the happy too, genuinely. I have never wanted bad things for my sister. My grief about my childhood is about my parents. Petra was a child too. She didn't choose to be favored. She just didn't push back against it, which is a different kind of failure than the one my parents committed. The engagement party was my mom's idea. The venue, the guest list, the lemon cake, all my mom. She called me 6 weeks before to tell me about it, and at the end of the call, almost as an afterthought, she mentioned that it would be so lovely if I could help with a few things. Set up some of the food prep, helping my grandmother get settled since she has mobility issues now. I said, sure. Of course. What I did not expect was to arrive and find that helping with a few things meant I was essentially the event coordinator who hadn't been told she was the event coordinator. I had a list. An actual, handwritten list on a yellow legal pad, sitting on the kitchen counter with my name at the top. Centerpieces. Parking coordination. Managing the caterer. Keeping the kids' table occupied during the speeches. I stood in my parents' kitchen holding that list, and I had a very distinct feeling that I recognized from childhood. The feeling of being handed something heavy and being expected to carry it without comment. Because that's just who I was in this family. the capable one. The one who figures it out. I carried it. I set up the centerpieces. I handled the caterer, who was 20 minutes late and slightly panicked. I got my grandmother settled at her table near the window where she could see everything, and I sat with her for a few minutes before the guests started arriving, and she held my hand and said, "You look tired, sweetheart." I told her I was fine. About an hour into the party, once everything was running and the champagne was open, my mom found me refilling the ice bucket. She put her hand on my arm and said she needed to ask me something. There was a careful quality to her voice that I had learned over 31 years to not trust. She said that things had been a little tight lately. She said my dad's brother Garrett, the same uncle, the one from 13 years ago, had gotten into some new financial trouble, and my dad was feeling the strain of trying to help. She said that my sister's wedding was going to be expensive. She said all of this in a gentle, meandering way, and then she arrived at the point. She had heard from someone, she didn't say who, that my business was doing really well. She wanted to know if I might be willing to co-sign a small business loan for my dad, just to help him get some cash flow. Just temporarily. "You have the credit," she said. "It would really just be your name on the paperwork." I put down the ice bucket. I want to be careful here about how I describe what happened inside me in that moment, because I don't want to be dramatic. It was not rage, exactly. It was something more like clarity. A very cold, very calm recognition of a pattern so old and so consistent that it almost felt absurd to be surprised by it. I said, "Mom, you took my college fund when I was 18. She started to say something about how that was complicated, about how they'd been in a hard place too, about how they'd always intended to pay it back. I said, "I'm not relitigating it right now. I'm just naming what happened. You took that money and you've never once acknowledged it. And now you're asking me to put my credit on the line for Dad's brother, who still owes me money. He doesn't even know he owes me because it was my fund, not yours." My mom looked at me the way people look when they're trying to determine if you're serious. She said quietly that she didn't think I needed to bring all of that up right now. "I'm not gonna co-sign anything," I said. "I'm going to go finish the centerpieces." I went back to the party. I smiled at people. I talked to my grandmother, who was watching me with an expression I couldn't fully read. I watched my sister be radiant in the center of the room, and I felt something that was complicated but not unkind. I ate a piece of lemon cake standing up by the buffet table. What I did not know, what I had no idea was happening, was that my mother had gone to my aunt some time after our conversation and had apparently described it to her. I don't know exactly what she said. I only know what happened next. About 30 minutes before the party ended, my aunt stood up. She said she wanted to say a few words about the family, about what it meant to watch these kids grow up. It was a normal toast setup. People half turned toward her with their glasses, and then she said that she had been sitting on something for years and that this felt like the right moment to say it, because too much silence on certain things becomes its own kind of lie. She said she had always watched both of her sister's daughters work hard, but she had watched one of them work harder, with less support, and never once complain. She said she knew about the college fund. She had always known, because my mother had told her at the time, framing it as borrowing, which was a word that required paying back, which had not happened. She said she had watched her niece build a business from the ground up while attending every family event as though none of it had happened, and she thought that deserved to be named. She raised her glass. "To Nadia," she said, "who figured it out because she had no other choice." The room was quiet in a way that rooms don't usually get at engagement parties. My grandmother, from her table by the window, said, "Here, here," and drank. My mother didn't speak for a long time. My dad looked at the tablecloth. My sister looked at me, and her expression was something I had never quite seen on her face before. It wasn't guilt, exactly. It was more like the look of someone who has just realized a story they've been living in has a different shape than they thought. Later, after most of the guests had gone and we were cleaning up, me, again, cleaning up, Petra came to stand next to me at the kitchen sink. She didn't say anything for a minute. She picked up a dish towel. She started drying. After a while she said, "I didn't know about the college fund." I said, "I know you didn't." She said, "Did you really build a whole business and just not tell anyone?" "You never asked," I said, not unkindly, just honestly. She was quiet again. Then, "I'm asking now." I looked at her. This person I had grown up alongside, who had been handed things I was not handed, who had not chosen that and had also not questioned it, who was now 38 years old and engaged and standing in our parents' kitchen drying dishes at 10 o'clock at night asking me a real question for maybe the first time in our lives. "It started with 3 clients," I said. "And the vacuum I found on Facebook Marketplace." She laughed. A small, real laugh. Of course it did. We stood there in that kitchen for another hour, long after our parents had retreated somewhere quiet. I told her about the business, the real version, not the surface answer I'd been giving for years. She told me things too, things about her own experience of growing up that surprised me. Not enough to rewrite everything, but enough to complicate it. My aunt texted me the next morning. She said, "I hope that was okay. I should have asked." I wrote back, "It was okay. I think I needed someone else to say it out loud." She said, "You built something remarkable. Your parents made a choice that was wrong. Both of those things are true at the same time and one doesn't cancel the other." I read that message 3 times. I saved it. Here's what I want to say about forgiveness, because I know it's the thing everyone lands on. I have heard my whole adult life some version of "they're still your parents, you should let it go." And I understand the impulse behind that. I do. People want clean endings. They want the family to hug it out and sit around a table and have the music swell. But healing is not the same thing as pretending. Letting go of the bitterness is not the same as pretending the college fund wasn't real money that changed the real trajectory of my real life. I went to community college instead of Ohio State from the beginning. I graduated a year later than I would have. I started my business on a shoestring because my margin for error was 0. I carried all of that. I would have carried it either way, but I should not have had to carry it because the money meant for me was given to someone else without my knowledge or consent. What I have decided is this: I am not going to co-sign any loans. I am not going to be the event coordinator for my sister's wedding unless I'm asked directly and compensated for my time like any other vendor. I am going to keep showing up to family events as a person, not a function. I am going to answer questions about my business with real answers, because I spent too long shrinking it to fit into a conversation that wasn't interested. I still don't know what my mom will do with any of this. I don't know if my dad will ever actually say the words out loud. I know my grandmother pressed my hand when I hugged her goodbye that night and held on for an extra second, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. I know my aunt said something that needed saying. I know my sister dried dishes with me for an hour in the dark and asked a real question and listened to the real answer. I know that I built something from nothing and I did it alone and it is mine. Fully and completely in a way that nothing in my childhood ever was. The deeper wound was never really the money. The money was just the part you could put a number on. The deeper wound was being told in 100 quiet ways over 1,000 quiet days that I was the one who didn't need, when what was actually happening was that no one was making sure I had what I needed. Because I had already learned not to ask. I stopped asking a long time ago. I started building instead, and at a party that wasn't even mine, in a room full of people who finally had to look directly at what had been carefully not seen for years, I realized that the building was always the answer. Not because it proved something to them, but because it proved something to me. I drove home that night with the windows down. It was cold for May, but I needed the air. I kept thinking about what my aunt said. Both things are true at the same time. The harm was real. The thing I built is also real. Neither one cancels the other. I think I spent a long time waiting for one of those to stop being true. I don't think that's how it works. Both things just live there, side by side. Like sisters who grew up in the same house and somehow became strangers and then, maybe, slowly, with a lot of dish towels and a lot of silence and a few honest questions asked too late, maybe something else. I'm still figuring out what to call it. I've been thinking about what my aunt said, that both things can be true at the same time. The harm was real. The thing I built is also real. For a long time, I thought those two facts were in competition with each other. Like, one had to cancel the other out before I was allowed to feel okay. It doesn't work that way. What I understand now, looking back at all of it, is that the choices people make tend to catch up with them. Not in some dramatic cinematic way. Just quietly, over time, in the accumulation of what they built and what they didn't. My parents made a choice when I was 18. They took money that belonged to me and spent it on other things and told themselves it was complicated. And then they made that same kind of choice again and again over the years. Every time they handed Petra something without asking whether I had what I needed. Every time they called me resourceful like it was a compliment instead of an abdication. Those choices didn't disappear. They just waited. They showed up at an engagement party 13 years later in the middle of a toast no one saw coming, and my choices did the same thing. Every hour I worked at that restaurant instead of going out. Every community college class I took when I could have been bitter and stalled. Every contract I chased, every employee I trained, every time I watched a YouTube video about an industry I knew nothing about because learning was the only tool I had left. Those choices accumulated too. They became something. They became mine. I think about what it actually took to build what I built. And it wasn't just stubbornness, it was having to think clearly when I was angry, which is one of the hardest things a person can do. It was refusing to make decisions out of resentment because resentment makes you sloppy and sloppy is expensive when you have no margin for error. There's a kind of discipline in that. Not the discipline of following rules, but the discipline of knowing what you're actually trying to build and not letting the noise knock you off course. I had to develop that, it didn't come naturally. I had to learn it the way you learn anything hard, which is by doing it wrong first and then doing it again. The integrity part is something I'm still working on. Not in the big dramatic sense. I haven't stolen anything or hurt anyone. I mean the quieter version. Being honest about what happened without letting that honesty curdle into a story where I'm only a victim and my family is only a villain. My parents made wrong choices. They also made me in some way. Not the way they think. Not by supporting me, but by being the resistance I had to push against. My sister didn't ask to be favored. She's also capable of picking up a dish towel and asking a real question, which she did at 10 o'clock at night, and that matters. What I want, if I'm being honest, is to stop carrying the weight of what wasn't given to me. Not because my parents deserve that release. Because I do. I spent 13 years building a life that proved something, and I think I've proven it. I don't need to keep proving it. I can just live in it now. That's the thing about building something real. At some point you get to stop building to survive and start building because you actually want to see what comes next. I'm starting to want to see what comes next.